Before this story continues, let me say one important thing clearly. The story you are about to hear is a work of fiction created for educational and entertainment purposes. It explores toxic family dynamics and their emotional impact within the context of military life and U.S. military families. All characters, ranks, units, locations, timelines, and events are entirely fictional and do not represent, reflect, or imply any real individuals, military units, or organizations within the U.S. Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, or Coast Guard. This content may be supported by AI tools during its creative process. It does not depict real events, disclose military information, or promote violence, hatred, or harm of any kind. The story is told with respect for the core values of the United States military, including honor, discipline, accountability, and human dignity. All content is advertiser-friendly and intended to comply fully with YouTube community and monetization policies. If you are a woman who has stood behind a military family who has stayed quiet, endured more than anyone ever noticed, and carried weight in silence, stay until the end. And if this story reaches you, share your thoughts in the comments or follow the channel for more stories meant for strong hearts that are rarely heard. I am Bryn. I am 25 years old. I am enlisted in the U.S. Army assigned to a paperwork MOS most people never notice until something goes wrong. Accountability, movement rosters, protocol packets, the boring details that quietly keep everything standing. It is late May 2025 in Fayetteville, North Carolina, Memorial Day weekend. My stepfather, Mark Kellen, has turned our backyard into a neighborhood barbecue. Folding chairs, coolers, American flags, zip tied to the fence, and a mix of neighbors and local veterans drifting in and out with paper plates. My mother, Evelyn, moves between guests with a fixed smile, already tired. My stepsister, Paige, floats with her phone raised, filming stories, always filming. This is Mark's house, his rules, his audience. I arrive in uniform because I came straight from duty. I did not plan to make a statement. I planned to eat, nod, and leave early. I step through the gate and hear the sound first. A pop of a beer can. Laughter. Someone saying my name like it is a punchline. Mark spots me and grins wide. Loud enough for the people nearest the grill to hear, he points at my uniform and says, "Well, look at that. She thinks wearing that makes her special." A few people chuckle. Paige lifts her phone a little higher. I feel my mother stiffen behind me. Mark does not stop. He never stops when he has an audience. "Take that off." He laughs. "Let's see who still respects you then." The word respect lands heavy. He looks around, enjoying the moment. "You're not even an officer, Bryn. Don't act like you outrank anyone here." Someone laughs again, sharper this time. Paige tilts her phone toward me and says, "Hold on, you have to hear this. Watch this." I do not speak. I breathe in through my nose and count 4. Out through my mouth, count 4. A habit from training. My hands move on their own, smoothing the crease on my sleeve, straightening my collar. I stare at the toes of my boots. Mark steps closer, lowering his voice just enough to sound reasonable. "Come on, don't be dramatic. You love attention." Always playing the victim. Paige's camera stays on me. My mother finally speaks, but not the way a mother should. "Bryn, please, don't make this awkward. Just do what he's asking so everyone can enjoy the day." That is the moment something breaks. Not loud, not visible, something quiet and final. I realize this is not teasing. This is punishment. This is about control. I lift my head and look around. I see who is watching. I see who is smiling. I see who is uncomfortable and choosing silence. I say nothing. In the Army, I learned something early. Do not react. Observe. There are fights you win by standing still at the right moment. Mark scoffs when I do not move. "See? She's sulking. This is what I mean. Always making things difficult." Paige swings the camera toward my face and says, "Say hi. People love this stuff. If you have ever been humiliated by your own family in front of strangers, comment, respect right now." The sound of my phone buzzing in my pocket is almost lost under the noise. I glance down just enough to see the screen light up. On our way. Beneath it, a second line. Torres. Escort. Protocol. I lock the screen without reading further. My pulse stays even. Mark follows my eyes and smirks. Who you texting? Your secret boyfriend? Or your commander coming to save you? More laughter. I think of a phrase drilled into us during accountability training. Boring details save lives. I straighten my shoulders and stay exactly where I am. I do not explain. I do not defend. The air shifts before anyone understands why. A car door closes out front. Then another. The laughter fades into an uncertain murmur. Mark opens his mouth to say something else louder this time when the gate creaks open. The room changes. You can feel it when authority enters a space before a word is spoken. If you have ever watched a room go quiet without anyone asking for silence, you know. This is not over. When I think about why the word respect hurts the way it does, my mind does not go to that afternoon in the backyard. It goes back years to the slow way a family teaches you where you rank without ever saying it out loud. Mark Kellen entered our lives in 2016. I was 16, then old enough to notice patterns, young enough to believe adults when they said things would settle with time. He arrived with rules disguised as structure. House rules, he called them. Shoes lined a certain way. Doors closed softly. No raised voices. No scenes. Respect meant obedience. At first it felt harmless, even reasonable. My mother Evelyn said she was relieved someone was taking charge. By 2017, the rules expanded. Meals at fixed times. Lights out earlier than necessary. Questions met with looks. By 2018, Mark had opinions about everything from how long showers should last to what tone of voice was acceptable when I disagreed. If I pushed back even politely, he would smile and say, "You're being dramatic." Or worse, "You're making things difficult again." In 2019, he started keeping score. Gas money, groceries, electricity. If I left a light on, he would remind me how much it cost. If I needed a ride, he would say, "I hope you appreciate this." Loan shaming became his favorite tool. It sounded small to outsiders. To me, it sounded like being told I was a guest in my own home. My mother asked me to be patient. "He means well," she would say. "Just let it go." Family harmony mattered more than my comfort. In 2020, at 18, I enlisted. Not because I wanted to escape, though, that was part of it. I wanted structure that made sense. I wanted rules that were written down and applied evenly. When I told Mark, he laughed. "Ran away to play soldier, huh?" He said it in front of my mother like it was a joke. When I left for training, he told me not to expect the world to wait. "You'll be back when you realize how hard it is," he said. Paige, my stepsister, stayed. She was 2 years older, confident, practiced at smiling through tension. By 2022, she had a new car that Mark helped pay for. When I asked about it, my mother said Paige needed it for work. "Be mature, Bryn." In 2023, Paige announced her engagement. The ring was expensive. Mark hosted a dinner, invited neighbors, made a toast about supporting family dreams. I was home on leave and sat at the edge of the table. When I asked quietly how they were affording the wedding, Mark replied, "Some of us have responsibilities. Paige has a future. You chose a different path. Be mature." In 2024, Paige racked up credit card debt. I overheard conversations about balances and minimum payments. Mark covered it and called it an investment. When I needed help replacing worn boots, he reminded me I had a paycheck. "You're independent now, remember?" My mother repeated her refrain. "Just endure. Don't cause problems." Paige perfected weaponized politeness. In public, she praised my service, touched my arm, told people how proud she was. In private, she said things that stuck. "Must be nice having an excuse not to build a real life." Or, "Men don't want women who think they're soldiers." One night at dinner, after I mentioned an upcoming training cycle, Mark put his fork down and said it plainly. "No man wants a woman who thinks she's a soldier." The table went quiet. My mother stared at her plate. Paige smirked and changed the subject. I swallowed the words I wanted to say and tasted metal. That sentence lodged somewhere deep. It taught me what respect meant to him. Control. Silence. Shrinking. During those years, I learned another language. In uniform away from home, I was trusted with accountability tasks after a small incident during a movement exercise. Nothing dramatic, just a discrepancy that could have cascaded. I stayed late, checked lists, verified names. Boring details save lives, my NCO said when it was resolved. The phrase stayed with me. I was enlisted, low rank, but people relied on me. At home, none of that mattered. When I returned on leave, Mark still reminded me to turn off lights. He still asked if I planned to live there forever. He still joked that my uniform was a costume. My mother asked me to endure for the sake of peace. The longer it went on, the more I learned to doubt my own reactions. Maybe I was sensitive. Maybe respect was earned by keeping quiet. Then came the threat delivered casually like all the others. It was early 2025, a few weeks before Memorial Day. Mark pulled me aside after dinner. "If you embarrass me in front of people again, don't come back," he said. "I won't have my house disrespected." He framed it as concern. I heard it as exile. I nodded because that is what I had been trained to do in two different systems. Inside, something hardened. If you have ever been told to stay quiet, to keep the peace, comment, stay. I did not come to the barbecue empty-handed. Even as Mark's voice lingered in my head from weeks earlier, even as the smell of charcoal and beer drifted through the yard, my work followed me like a second heartbeat. The Memorial Day event at Fort Liberty had been on my calendar for months. Not the speeches everyone remembered, not the flags or the music, but the quiet machinery underneath that kept people moving where they were supposed to be. Seating charts that matched badges, escort lists aligned with arrival windows, remarks timed to the minute so nothing overlapped, radios checked batteries, fresh channels confirmed. I had spent the morning reviewing packets one last time, fingers tracing boxes I knew by memory. There is a rhythm to this kind of work. Read, verify, confirm, read again. It is not glamorous. It does not come with applause. It is trusted, because when it fails, everything fails. By early afternoon, I was on standby, uniform pressed, phone on silent except for a single thread marked priority. I told myself I would eat a plate of food, say hello to the neighbors, and leave before sunset. The moment Mark opened his mouth, that plan evaporated. Still, I kept my phone close. I did not scroll, I did not explain. I listened to the radio etiquette in my head, the habit of brevity drilled into me. Say only what needs to be said. At Fort Liberty, the event team had adjusted the seating chart twice that week. A late confirmation. A change in remarks timing. None of it dramatic. All of it precise. There is a phrase we use quietly when something shifts without warning. Arrival window changed. It means eyes up, slow down, double check. It means someone important is moving and the system must adapt without panic. I had need to know about that adjustment. Not details, not routes. Just enough to do my job and keep the rest clean. My phone buzzed once against my palm as Mark's laughter rose behind me. I angled the screen away on instinct and saw the message. Copy. We will coordinate. Signed Torres, MSG. Torres was an NCO I trusted. He did not waste words. When he wrote it, mattered. I locked the screen and slipped the phone back into my pocket. My shoulders settled. There is a particular calm that comes when preparation meets reality. Mark noticed the movement. He always did. His eyes flicked from my face to my pocket and back again. "Who you texting now?" He said it with a grin meant to invite the crowd in. Paige leaned closer, already smiling. "Your secret boyfriend finally calling you." The comment drew laughter from the people nearest the cooler. It was the kind of joke men my stepfather's age loved because it carried no risk to them. I did not respond. I watched a neighbor shift uncomfortably. I watched my mother pretend not to hear. I watched Paige tilt her phone to catch my reaction. Inside, a familiar thought surfaced and passed like a cloud. If they knew what I was doing, they still would not understand. I was not offended by that anymore. Understanding is not a requirement for respect. Mark took my silence as permission. He clapped a hand on my shoulder a little too hard. "Always so mysterious," he said. "Must be nice having secrets." Someone asked what I did in the army, and before I could answer, Mark waved it off. "Paperwork," he said. "She pushes papers. Nothing serious." I felt the old urge to correct him rise and fall. Paperwork is what keeps people alive. Paperwork is what prevents names from being missed. I thought of the seating chart folded neatly in my bag, every name aligned with a badge color and an escort number. I thought of the radio checklist I had reviewed that morning, the simple comfort of order. My phone buzzed again, short and controlled. 2 minutes out. I did not open the message. I did not need to. The phrase carried weight all on its own. Around me, the barbecue continued. Someone turned up the music. Paige laughed too loudly and panned her camera across the yard. My mother glanced at me, her eyes asking a question she would never say out loud. Please do not make this harder. I met her look and gave a small nod, not of agreement, but of assurance. I was not leaving. I was not running. Mark leaned in, lowering his voice just enough to pretend it was private. You know, he said, people don't like when you act superior. If you embarrass me today, don't bother coming back. I held his gaze for a moment, long enough for him to notice, not long enough to escalate. There are moments when resistance is loud, and moments when it is simply staying where you are. This was the latter. The hum of a car engine reached the edge of the yard, barely audible over the music. I felt the tension shift, subtle but real. I straightened my posture without thinking, the way I did on duty when a senior leader entered a space. I was done shrinking. I would not leave the barbecue. I would not hide in the house. Whatever was coming, I would meet it standing still. The crowd thickened the way it always does when discomfort becomes entertainment. A few more neighbors drifted closer, drawn by raised voices, and the promise of a moment they would talk about later. 2 older men from down the street, veterans by the way they stood and scanned, stopped near the fence. Paige's friends clustered together, phones out, smiling in that tight way people do when they sense drama but do not want to be the cause of it. Mark noticed the audience and straightened, energized. This was his house, his yard, his rules. He did not just want to humiliate me. He wanted to prove control. He stepped closer and gestured openly at my uniform. Come on, he said louder now. Take that off. Let's see who you are without it. This isn't a base. This is my house. The words landed heavier the second time. This was no longer teasing. This was a test. He was asking me to choose between dignity and belonging, between myself and the illusion of family harmony. Paige lifted her phone higher and grinned at the screen. Say hi to TikTok, she said. People love this stuff. The camera lens felt like a spotlight stripping more than fabric. I could feel eyes on me from every direction. Some curious, some amused, some uncomfortable and grateful it was not them. My mother moved quickly, taking my arm and steering me toward the kitchen. The noise dulled as the sliding door closed behind us. Her voice dropped into the tone she used when she wanted obedience without argument. Please, she said, just do it. I cannot handle it if the neighbors think something is wrong with our family. That sentence cut deeper than anything Mark had said. Not protect me, not stop him, just do it. Be smaller so things look normal. I looked at her and saw fear, not of me, but of judgment. I nodded once, not because I agreed, but because I needed the moment to pass. When we stepped back outside, the air felt thicker. Mark was waiting, arms crossed, a smile already forming. Paige was ready, camera trained. I stayed where I was, feet shoulder-width apart, spine straight, chin level. I did not speak. Inside, my mind cataloged the scene the way it always did under pressure. Who was watching closely? Who was laughing too hard? Who had gone quiet? The veterans had stopped talking. One neighbor stared at the ground. Paige's friends whispered and smiled. Mark mistook my stillness for defiance he could crush. He took a step forward. I asked you to take it off, he said, louder, sharper. Don't make me repeat myself. The phrase echoed in my head. This is not a joke. This is punishment. This is about showing everyone what happens when you do not comply. My phone vibrated once more in my pocket. I did not reach for it. I did not need to. 2 minutes out. I knew what it meant. I locked my knees, adjusted my shoulders, and stood exactly as I had been taught. Military posture is not aggressive. It is grounded. It says I am here and I am not folding. Paige laughed into her phone. Wow, she said. She really thinks this matters. Look at her. Mark threw his hands up for the benefit of the crowd. "See what I deal with," he said, always trying to prove something. He leaned closer, voice cutting. "Take that off, now." The yard went quiet for half a second. Not silence, but the kind of pause that happens when people sense a line has been crossed. In that pause, the gate creaked open. "If you hate family humiliation for content, tap like right now." The sound of footsteps followed, measured and unhurried. Mark opened his mouth to repeat himself, louder, more forceful. "Take that off," he barked. The words hung in the air as the gate swung wider. The gate finished swinging open, and the air shifted the way it does when real authority enters a casual space without asking permission. A black SUV rolled to a clean stop at the curb, as if it had been timed to the second engine quiet. No dramatic flash, just presence. The first man through the gate was not the general. He was a senior NCO by the way he moved, measured, alert, scanning corners and faces without making a show of it. He wore a neat polo and slacks, but the posture gave him away. Master Sergeant Torres. He paused just long enough to take in the scene, my stance. Paige's phone held high. Mark's body squared toward me like he was about to win a contest. Torres did not raise his voice. He did not need to. His eyes moved from the phone to Paige and then to Mark, and the entire yard seemed to tighten around that glance. Behind him, the general stepped in calmly. Not hurried, not stern in a theatrical way, just steady like a man who has stood in worse places and learned not to spend emotion unless it matters. His presence was immediate. The conversations died mid-sentence. Laughter evaporated. Even the people who had been leaning forward for entertainment straightened as if they suddenly remembered they were adults. Mark's mouth was still open from his last command, but no sound came out. Paige kept recording for half a beat longer. Maybe out of habit. Maybe because she thought she could spin this too. The general looked at her phone first, then at me, then at Mark. His tone stayed level, almost quiet, but it carried across the yard as if the air itself wanted to listen. "Who's recording my soldier?" The question did not land like a threat. It landed like a boundary being placed on the ground. Paige's smile flickered. She tried to keep it playful. "It's just a video," she said, like she was hosting something cute. The general did not change his expression. He followed with a second question, just as clean, just as direct. "Why is she being asked to remove her uniform?" Mark shifted his weight and forced a laugh that came out too late, too sharp. "Sir," he said, then seemed to realize he did not know how to address this moment, so he grabbed the word joke like a shield. "We're just joking around. Family stuff. You know how it is." He spread his hands, inviting the crowd to agree with him to confirm he was harmless. The general did not step closer. He did not loom. He simply spoke like an adult who refuses to pretend cruelty is humor. A joke doesn't require humiliation. That sentence made the yard go fully silent. Not the awkward silence from before the half-second pause, but a real one, the kind veterans recognize, the kind that means everyone has just been given a standard and cannot unhear it. I felt my throat tighten, not because I wanted to cry, but because for once someone had named what it was without me having to beg for it. Mark tried again, softer, desperate now. "I didn't mean it like that. She takes everything so seriously. She thinks that uniform makes her special." He nodded toward me as if he was explaining a misbehaving child. The general's gaze stayed on him. "Uniform isn't costume. It's responsibility." The words were not a speech. They were a correction, the kind that protects something larger than one person. The two veterans by the fence shifted subtly attention, fixed faces unreadable, but I could tell the line had reached them. They were not looking at me like a kid playing soldier. They were looking at me like someone who had carried weight. Paige tried to laugh again, but it sounded thin. She angled her phone toward the general like she wanted a reaction, something spicy for the clip. Torres moved one step, smooth and controlled, and addressed her without heat. "Ma'am, stop recording." Paige blinked, still smiling, as if she could flirt her way out of it. "Seriously," she said. "It's my account." Torres did not argue. He repeated it with the same calm. "Stop recording." The firmness in his voice made it clear this was not about her account. It was about dignity and control of narrative. Paige's thumb hesitated over the screen. For the first time all afternoon, she looked unsure. She lowered the phone a few inches. Torres watched until the screen went dark. Paige swallowed suddenly, too aware of all the witnesses. Mark's face tightened. He had been enjoying being the loudest person in the yard. Now he was not even the most important. He tried to reclaim the moment by shifting to charm. "Sir," he said, "I respect the military. I do. I served my country in my own way. I pay taxes. I support the troops." He chuckled, waiting for someone to laugh with him. Nobody did. The general's attention moved to me, and I felt that strange sensation of being seen without being exposed. He did not ask me to explain. He did not ask me to perform pain for the crowd. He simply acknowledged me with a small nod that felt like permission to keep my spine straight. Then, as if he were connecting a simple dot in a file, he said Bryn. The way he said my name was not intimate. It was professional, familiar through work. He turned slightly toward Mark again, still calm. "She's the one who caught the discrepancy in the roster." That was all. No bragging, no dramatic reveal, just a single line that meant everything to the people who understood. The veterans near the fence exchanged a quick glance, the kind that says, "Oh, she is that soldier." The one who notices what everyone else misses. The one who keeps the wheels from coming off. My pulse hammered in my ears. Not because I felt proud in a loud way, but because the sentence validated years of quiet labor that my own family had mocked as meaningless. Mark blinked confused. Discrepancy, he repeated like it was a foreign language. He looked around for support, but the crowd had shifted away from him emotionally, if not physically. Neighbors who had laughed earlier now avoided his eyes. Paige's friends stood stiff, suddenly aware they had been part of something ugly. My mother hovered at the edge of the patio, hands clasped, lips pressed tight. She looked like she wanted to apologize and also like she still wanted to disappear. Mark tried one last time to frame himself as the victim of misunderstanding. "I was trying to teach her humility," he said. "She needs to learn respect in my home." The general's gaze held steady. "Respect is earned, not demanded. If you believe respect is earned, not demanded, comment, squared." The words were simple, but they dropped like a weight. Mark's shoulders sagged a fraction. He was not being yelled at. He was being measured, and he did not meet the measure. Torres remained close, a quiet wall ensuring the situation stayed controlled. Nobody moved toward me. Nobody asked me to take anything off. Nobody laughed. I did not smile. I did not need to. I stayed where I was. Chin-level shoulders squared the uniform sitting on my body like it finally belonged in this yard as much as it belonged anywhere. Mark looked as if he wanted to speak, to argue, to rewrite what had just happened. He could not find a sentence that would survive the silence. The general did not stay to savor the silence he had created. That was the part that hit me hardest later when the adrenaline wore off and I was alone with the sound of my own breathing. He did not turn my humiliation into a victory lap. He gave a correction, drew a line, and then he left like a man who had other duties and understood that dignity is not a performance. He nodded once to me, a small professional acknowledgement that said, "You are steady, stay steady." Master Sergeant Torres gave a final glance around the yard, the same calm scan, and then he guided the general back through the gate. The SUV door closed with a soft final sound, and the vehicle rolled away without drama. No sirens, no speeches, just departure. And yet, the yard felt different, as if someone had opened a window and the old stale air could not settle back into place. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then the murmurs started, careful, embarrassed, like people were trying to decide what they had just witnessed. I kept my posture because I did not trust my face. Mark stood near the grill with his hands hanging at his sides as if he had forgotten what to do with them. Paige stared at her dark phone screen like it had betrayed her. My mother moved 2 steps toward me, then stopped, caught between habit and shame. The neighbors began collecting plates and folding chairs earlier than planned. The veterans did not make a scene, but they did something louder than yelling. They looked at Mark the way you look at a man who tried to be funny at someone else's expense and got exposed for what he was. They did not argue with him. They simply stopped including him. That is how a community delivers consequences when it still has standards. It is quiet. It is slow. It is undeniable. Within 10 minutes, the yard that had been loud and crowded felt hollow. People made excuses to leave. One of the older guys, a Marine by the haircut, and the way he carried his shoulders, paused near me as if he wanted to say something. He did not give a speech. He just nodded once, eyes steady, and said, "Good on you." Then he walked away. That tiny sentence landed deeper than any apology I had begged for in years. Mark tried to recover. He laughed once too loud and called after a couple of neighbors. "See you at the meeting next week." Nobody answered. Paige's friends avoided her eyes. My mother kept wiping a spot on the counter that was already clean. When the last car backed out of the driveway, the silence became physical. Mark cleared his throat and tried to act as if he still controlled the story. "Well, that was ridiculous," he said, like the problem had been the interruption, not his behavior. Paige turned on him for half a second, panic flashing. "Dad," she hissed. "Why did you do that on camera?" Mark glared at her, then remembered there was no audience left to impress. He looked at me instead, and his eyes carried a warning he did not say out loud. "This is your fault," his face told me. "You made me look bad." I did not answer. I had learned something in uniform that applied at kitchen tables too. You do not wrestle with someone who only knows how to win by dragging you down. I walked inside, slow and controlled, and I heard him mutter behind me. Unbelievable, like he had been wronged. The next morning, the ripple effect showed up in places I did not touch and could not control, which was the whole point. The veterans in the neighborhood talk. Not in a gossip way, but in a values way. They remember who honors the uniform and who uses it as a punchline. By Monday, Mark's phone started getting fewer answers. He mentioned a committee meeting for the local Memorial Day volunteer group, like it was nothing but. I watched him check his email at the kitchen table and then set the phone down a little too carefully. Paige came in later, face tight, trying to look casual. She did not succeed. "They removed me," she said to Mark, voice sharp with humiliation. "Removed you from what he asked, though he already knew." "The volunteer committee," she snapped. "The one for the neighborhood ceremony. They said my conduct was disrespectful. Disrespectful conduct." She repeated the words like they were poison. She looked at me then as if she expected me to flinch with guilt. I did not. Paige had spent years treating other people's dignity like content. Now, a committee had told her politely that she could not do that and still represent them. Mark's jaw worked. He tried to laugh it off, but it would not come. He had spent his whole life believing consequences were for other people. When the system finally spoke back, he did not know how to hear it. I did not celebrate. I did not replay the moment in my head for satisfaction. I went back to the thing that had always kept me sane: routine. I took my boots off by the door, swapped into running shoes, and wiped the dust from the toe caps the way I always do, not because anyone sees it, but because discipline is a kind of respect you give yourself. I laid out my uniform for the Fort Liberty Memorial Day event, checked my name tape, checked the alignment, checked the small details that people think are boring until something goes wrong. I made coffee. I wiped the kitchen counter. I folded a towel that had been left in a heap. Ordinary motions, steady breathing. In my head, I repeated the sentence that mattered. This is not a victory. This is a boundary. My mother hovered again, watching me without interrupting. She looked older than she had on Sunday. Not because of years, but because of realization. That afternoon, she approached me while I was brushing lint from my sleeve. Her voice was small, awkward, like she had forgotten how to speak honestly. "I'm sorry," she said. It did not sound polished. It sounded like it cost her something. She tried to add a defense habit tugging at her, but the words came out different this time. "I was scared, Bryn. I was scared of what people would think." She swallowed and looked down at her hands. "I didn't want the neighbors to think our family was broken." I stared at her, feeling the strange mix of anger and pity that comes when you finally understand a person's weakness. She was not suddenly a hero. She was still the same woman who had asked me to swallow pain to keep the peace. But this was the first time she had named the real reason. Not love, not unity, fear. That was the value point I carried into the next day. Justice sometimes is not loud. Sometimes it is simply this. Other people finally see what you have been carrying. If you have ever learned that silence can be strength, comment, quiet. About 10 days after Memorial Day, the house settled into a new kind of quiet, the kind that follows a storm when everyone is counting what was damaged and what cannot be put back. Mark tried to pretend nothing had changed, but the cracks showed in small, ordinary ways that mattered to people his age. He stopped mentioning the neighborhood committee meetings he used to dominate. He lingered at the kitchen table longer than usual, scrolling through his phone and setting it down face down whenever someone walked by. One afternoon, I heard him on the porch, voice low and careful, explaining himself to someone on the other end of the line. It did not go well. He hung up and stared at the yard as if it had betrayed him. Later, my mother told me what he would not say out loud. The opportunity he had been counting on, a small local contract tied to a community board he had served on for years, had gone to someone else. No argument, no appeal, just a polite note about a change in direction. He tried to laugh it off at dinner, calling it politics, but his hands shook when he reached for his glass. Paige did not handle the shift with any grace. Her phone stayed dark longer than usual. Invitations slowed. The volunteer group that had removed her stopped responding to her messages. She came home one night furious and humiliated, pacing the kitchen and blaming everyone within reach. "This is on you," she snapped at me, eyes bright with anger. "You made me look bad." I watched her the way I always had, noticing how quickly confidence collapses when it is built on an audience. She wanted someone to fix it for her. She wanted the story changed back. Mark waited another day before approaching me. He did not knock. He stood in the doorway of my room like a man measuring the distance between pride and necessity. His voice had lost its swagger. He cleared his throat and tried a tone he must have practiced. "I need you to help me say one thing," he said. Just one sentence. "You have people listening to you now?" The words hung there. Help me say one thing. He did not say sorry. He did not name what he had done. He was asking for access, not forgiveness. I set down what I was holding and faced him fully. I kept my voice level because volume would have given him something to push against. "I will do one thing I said. Say what you did. Out loud. No joke. No excuses. Just say it." He blinked, surprised by the simplicity of the request. His mouth opened, then closed. He tried again. "I was just trying to teach you respect," he said, defaulting to the line that had always protected him. I shook my head once. "That is not it. Say what you did." He shifted his weight, irritation flickering. "You know what I mean. People took it the wrong way." I leaned against the door frame, grounded, unmoved. "Say it. Out loud." He exhaled sharply, frustration rising. I was joking. That was the closest he could get. I felt the final door inside me close, not with anger but with clarity. "I will not use my service to protect your disrespect," I said. The sentence did not feel rehearsed. It felt like a fact. Mark stared at me as if he had expected the uniform to grant him leverage instead of denying it. He tried to recover with a softer angle. "You are blowing this out of proportion. Family sticks together." I held his gaze. Family does not ask you to erase yourself so they can look good. He looked past me then, as if hoping my mother would step in and smooth it over the way she always had. She did not. Evelyn had been standing in the hallway, quiet, listening. For the first time, she spoke without apologizing for the sound of her own voice. "Enough," she said. It was not loud. It did not need to be. Mark turned to her, shocked. Evelyn did not raise her voice. She did not list grievances. She simply did not retreat. She met his eyes and repeated it once more, slower. "Enough." The word landed heavier than shouting ever could. Mark's face hardened. He muttered something about ingratitude and walked away, the door closing with a flat sound that echoed down the hall. Paige followed him later, throwing one last look over her shoulder at me, a mix of blame and disbelief. The days that followed did not bring reconciliation. They brought reality. Mark stopped talking about the contract altogether. When neighbors passed him on the sidewalk, some nodded politely and kept walking. Others did not slow down. Paige tried posting again, testing the waters with a carefully curated photo, then deleted it when the response failed to arrive. The audience she had relied on did not come back on command. I did not reach out. I did not explain myself to anyone. I went to work focused on preparation for the next phase of the Memorial Day schedule, the quiet labor that never appears in photos, but determines whether events succeed or fail. At home, the atmosphere was tense but honest. My mother did not suddenly become brave, but she did stop asking me to disappear. That was enough for now. One evening, as I was checking my boots by the door, Mark hovered again, as if considering another attempt. He did not speak. He looked older than he had 2 weeks earlier, not in years but in certainty. He walked away without a word. I understood then that this was the consequence. Not punishment. Not humiliation returned in kind. Just access denied. Paige retreated into silence, her anger turning inward where it belonged. Mark carried his losses without commentary, learning the hard way that authority borrowed from intimidation dissolves when exposed to daylight. If you have ever been asked to help before being asked for forgiveness, comment, boundaries. The week after Mark stood in my doorway and left with nothing but his own silence, my life narrowed into the kind of discipline that does not ask anyone for permission. I started waking before my alarm, not because I was anxious, but because routine is the one thing toxic people cannot steal once you rebuild it on your own terms. I would sit at the edge of my bed for a breath, feet flat on the floor, and let the house be whatever it was behind the door. Then I would move. Shower. Uniform. Coffee. The same mug every morning, the same measured pour, the same pause while the steam rose. I kept my checklists on my phone and in my head. Not dramatic lists, just practical ones. Badge, keys, wallet, notes, timeline. I learned a long time ago that calm is not the absence of pressure. Calm is trained. At work, the Memorial Day event was over, but the after-action pieces never end. Reports, sign-ins, accountability sheets, lessons learned. The boring parts are where the truth lives, and I leaned into them because they made sense when people did not. My first sergeant used to say that the uniform is not what makes you steady. It just shows whether you are steady when nobody is watching. That became my quiet prayer. At home, things were still awkward, but the air had changed. Mark did not pick at me anymore. Paige did not bait me into defending myself. They moved around my presence like it had edges they could feel. My mother watched me in small ways, like she was studying a language she had never been allowed to speak. Some nights, she would hover near the sink while I packed my lunch for the next day, and she would start a sentence and stop. I did not push. I did not chase closure, like a reward. Healing in families like ours comes in inches, not speeches. 2 weeks after Memorial Day, our unit had an internal briefing tied to readiness and compliance, the kind of meeting most people outside the military would never notice. Fluorescent lights, folding chairs, a long table where the senior NCOs sat with binders and laptops. The mood was quiet, professional, almost plain. But I knew what was at stake. We had an upcoming inspection cycle, and the smallest discrepancy can turn into a chain of problems that eats time, money, and credibility. I sat near the back with my notebook listening. When the slide came up about accountability procedures, I felt a tightness in my chest, not fear, just recognition. Because a month earlier, I had caught a discrepancy that could have snowballed. It was the kind of thing nobody thinks about until it becomes a headline in the wrong place. A mismatch between roster formats, a small gap in the escort list, cross-check, a timing conflict that would have put the wrong names in the wrong place at the wrong time. I had flagged it, documented it, and pushed it up the chain the way you are taught, politely and clearly, with receipts, not ego. It was not heroic. It was correct. The briefing moved on. Then my commander paused and looked down the rows like he was searching for someone. "Specialist Bryn Kellen," he said. My stomach dropped in the way it does when your name is called in a room full of uniforms. "Stand up." The chairs creaked as people shifted. I stood, hands at my sides, posture automatic. For a second, the old family instinct flared, the fear of being singled out, of being mocked, of being turned into a lesson for someone else. Then I remembered where I was. This was not my kitchen. This was not Mark's porch. This was a place where accountability matters. The commander spoke in a steady voice that carried without dramatics. 2 weeks ago during the Memorial Day coordination, Specialist Kellen identified a roster discrepancy that would have created a compliance issue during the inspection window, he said. She corrected it through proper channels and documented the resolution. That action protected the unit from unnecessary exposure and kept the event execution clean. I felt heat rise behind my eyes, not because it was emotional in a dramatic way, but because it was simple and true. He did not say I was special. He said I was reliable. That is the kind of praise veterans respect. He nodded to my first sergeant, who stepped forward with a small coin in his hand. A unit coin, not flashy, not expensive, but heavy with meaning. He placed it in my palm with a firm handshake. The room gave a quiet acknowledgement, not applause, but the subtle sound of respect chairs, shifting people nodding once. Then the commander added one more line, and it landed like a door opening. Specialist Kellen will also be assigned to a small readiness support team for the next cycle. Need to know. She has proven she understands how small details prevent big problems. My throat tightened again. Not because I wanted power, because I wanted proof that I did not have to shrink to survive. When I sat down, my hands still felt the weight of the coin. It was a boring detail made visible, a life built on discipline recognized by the system that values it. That evening, I came home and set the coin on my dresser without announcing it. I changed out of my uniform, washed my hands, and moved through my usual routine. My mother stepped into my doorway and stared at the coin like she already knew what it meant. She did not ask for a story. She just stood there, and for a moment her face looked older, softer, like the part of her that had been afraid was finally tired of being afraid. "I am proud of you," she said. The words were plain. No apology attached. No request to make peace for appearances. Just pride offered in the right direction at last. I nodded once because anything more would have broken the thin bridge we were building. Later, as the house settled, I thought about everything that had happened. The humiliation, the silence in the yard, the general's calm questions, Mark's failed attempt to borrow my service to protect his ego. None of it ended with fireworks. It ended with boundaries holding. Revenge was not loud. It was refusing to shrink. Respect is a verb. It is lived, not demanded. If this story hit something in you, subscribe for more veteran-friendly justice stories and comment. Respect. If you believe quiet strength is still strength,